Good afternoon. Welcome to the panel. I'm Gina Luria Walker, Associate Professor of Women's Studies, a title I bear very proudly at the university. And before I introduce the panelists and the curators of the day, I just wanted to say something about the importance in our work, all of our work, of encouraging and inspiring students to contemplate and respond to and extend and advance all the kinds of feminism that there are. Because I would suggest that there are many, many feminisms, and that to be fanciful, the bouquet of them is part of what makes feminism so powerful, a continuing force for human advancement. So with that said, we have students who have excitedly embraced feminism and done work, and this very conference is a perfect example of that, although an unusually wonderful one. So, our panelists are Ilyn Wong, who is a visual artist living and working in New York. She has a BFA in painting from Washington University in St. Louis, an MA in art history. Thank you. I not only have a low voice, I'm short. And technically unable to do this. So thank you. Now I think I'm the right sound, the right height, and the appropriate microphone level. So Ilyn is currently pursuing an MFA in Fine Arts at Parsons. Her mixed media work includes painting, photography, sculpture, textiles, video, writing, and installation. She has participated in residencies and been members in collaboratives in Massachusetts, Berlin, Spain, Montana, and Amsterdam, an eclectic group. Robert Hickerson is a fine art senior who specializes in video, performance, and installation art. This past summer marked his first solo show, Debasement, at AMO Studios in Brooklyn. He has also been included in various group shows such as Hyperbolic Paraboloids. Did I get that right? At Columbia University's Poster Crypt Art Gallery, Pen Pallery at UCLA's Worthwriter Art Center, and the Meeting at MoMA PS1. And Molly Oberholtzer is a recent graduate from Parsons with a BFA in integrated design. With a focus in service design, she has worked for the Housing Preservation Department of New York City and nonprofit Public Policy Lab to ensure outcomes that are more collaborative than consumptive. Previously, she worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center doing research for multi-platform solutions in patient education. And I will introduce the curators. But I don't have to say very much about you. Well, just that Natalie graduated from Parsons with a master's in the history of decorative arts and designs. And Deborah Engel is also a graduate from Parsons, having earned a master's in the history of decorative art and design with distinction in the field of 20th century American popular and material culture. Needless to say, there's much more to say about all five of these people, but we will let them demonstrate their art in person now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. We are so glad that you were able to be a part of this this panel and for the kind words that you've said about our panelists and about the broader theme in general. So I just want to start with a series of thanks, and I know every panelist started this way, but I think it's very important. First and foremost, we'd like to thank Laura Riccio and Claire Potter for making the symposium a reality and for inviting so many incredible speakers to present on such a wide range of topics for discussion around this text, The Feminine Mystique. We'd also like to thank others who made this exhibition and symposium possible, especially the many branches of the New School who supported this idea from the very beginning. And perhaps most importantly for this panel, I would like to thank the artists across the New School and Parsons who contributed projects for inclusion. But back to Laura and Claire for a moment. It's been quite an exciting weekend of events, from the filming of Some American Feminists to a historical look at the home and kitchen and women's liberation and housewifery through design and food, to a beautiful keynote by Susan Ware last night. It's been truly a wonderful weekend. And for those of you who missed Susan's keynote last night, we felt it was a really perfect way to sort of jumpstart the weekend. Her positioning of the feminine mystique, highlighting its strengths and its weaknesses, really helped contextualize the text that not everyone has necessarily had the chance to thumb through its 400 pages. And before we move on to discussion about the exhibition and the artists, Deborah and I just wanted to give a little bit of background on the project. As many of you may have heard, it originated in a class taught by Laura Riccio in 2011. This class was called On Display. And the final project assignment was to produce an exhibition proposal. And Deborah and I, along with another classmate, Kate Cassiano, went through a whole list of ideas from just looking at the 1960s, the entire decade. Seemed a little aggressive, so we decided to scale it back to focusing on maybe just 1963. But then finally we landed on an idea, and no spoilers here. It was the feminine mystique, and we always wanted the exhibition and the symposium to be this link, because ideas that you can't explore through art, you can explore in the symposium and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And we also felt it was a great way to engage the New School, New York City, wide range of generations. And there were a lot of faculty members and staff that made the exhibition and the symposium stronger. And so, as you can tell, the idea for the exhibition is rooted in this idea of reaction. And we are interested to see and explore how the text resonated with students 50 years after it was published. And we learned that others were interested as well. And nearly half a dozen professors opened up their classrooms to us last fall, assigned the text or chapters of the text for students to read, and we could lead a discussion and talk about it. And those that we couldn't visit definitely forwarded our call for entries on to students. And without further ado, I'll turn over to Deborah, and as we begin our conversation with these three artists who we're all here to talk about today. So thank you.
So we do want to make this sort of a conversation, and we wanted to, we'll ask some questions of our artists, but also open it up to you. So hopefully you've all had a chance to see the incredible work that they have done. We really felt, we were really grateful with the quality of submissions that we received, and you three have some exceptional pieces. So I'm hoping you will each just take a few minutes to introduce your work and really just set the context for people who may not have seen it as well. And
Robert, do you want to start?
Sure. Okay. So thank you, Natalie and Deborah. I'm very honored to be a part of this exhibition. I made a piece called The Dining Room. It is a video artifact from an installation I made. And it started off kind of being a look at what a relationship is when the caregiving is not mutual. It's pretty much, for me, is a metaphor on trying to explore that relationship through the idea of a marriage. I made the piece and then got the email for the call for the Feminine Mystique show. And I hadn't read it before, so I went out and bought the book and began to read it. And then I started talking to my mom and was like, we should read this together. And she had read it a while ago, so we began to read it. And she grew up with a mother who was the poster child for the Feminine Mystique, and she made a lot of very similar decisions in her life. And so it kind of it morphed from something that was an internal dialogue that I had into like figuring out what like the Feminine Mystique was for my mother and my grandmother. And so the piece became a piece about my family. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
Great.
Ilyn?
Hi, I'm Ilyn, and thanks again to Deborah and Natalie for including us. So I'm sort of working on the larger project that I've been working on is thinking about the intersection between personal memory, cultural memory, and history. And recently, I've been given a series of slide photographs of my grandparents when they lived in the United States in the 1950s. And so they're, as sort of like historical documents, they're really meaningful to me as personal photographs of people who are gone, but also they're in this weird place of being an immigrant family living in the U.S., but also my grandfather was a general for the Chinese Air Force. So it kind of made sense to sort of think about the way in which these images relate to history and historical events. But the more I started thinking about it, the more it became sort of odd to me that my grandfather's biography was basically sort of can be seen in parallel with that of Chinese and Taiwanese history. But meanwhile, my grandmother, who was also sort of experiencing these events and being displaced, her story was never really told. And so the project has been writing a series of fictional diary entries through the perspective of my grandmother. And actually I have a diary that she wrote, and it's kind of a heartbreaking sort of thing I would have brought it, but it's raining out. But she's very sort of pragmatic in her writing. Like every day she wrote sort of went shopping, did my hair, and there wasn't sort of a lot of feelings or anything like that. And so the strategy of using fiction is something that I'm interested in kind of figuring out sort of what the relationship between fact and fiction can sort of reveal about our perspectives onto history and narratives of history. So.
Thank you. Ollie?
Thanks everybody for coming here. Thanks for letting me be on this panel. I actually started with all this work because I was in a senior seminar with Sarah Leachman, Cold War Theory and Modern Design. And so I ended up reading The Feminine Mystique, and I was so compelled and inspired, and just my mind was basically blown by all of the information that was still so relevant within it, so fascinating, that I was talking my friends' ears off. I was telling them all about it, and I was annoying them so much that I finally decided to create objects that would speak for me instead, and sort of just pass along these messages that are held in the book so I wouldn't have to bother everybody. But so then from up there at the top left, that's the diptych Song for the Sexist. And this one's pretty funny. As a design student, I was outraged when I heard about functionalism, which as a social science, that you're just reducing things. You're just reducing everything that's complicated about life into these A plus Bs. And so I wanted to poke fun at that and create an A plus B polarity of what is, okay, so yin and yang, men and women work together, and this is how it works. But I'd also like to open it up for conversation, because maybe, considering divorce rates these days and considering this pervasive unhappiness that we still seem to have, maybe that's what works. Maybe there's this almost acceptance of just it's what it is. Not that I'm encouraging this, but I'd like to consider things like this. And then on the right is prescription pearls. I thought it was really interesting how she spoke about marketing that actually translated fur coats into something that was thought of as sort of less civilized, into an object that women coveted, and how pearls represented so much to the civilized woman, and how to this day people shop to make themselves feel happier as therapy. And then at the same time, the mother's little helpers, the Valiums, that they couldn't solve the problem, so they prescribed it. They laughed about it, but it was something that nobody really understood, so let's just take the money and feed it into the system. So this is actually a reaction that somebody can wear. I wanted to design a piece of jewelry that would be comparable to this statement of pearls as a woman, but instead it would say, no, I'm not shopping for what this is. I'm not part of this system. I don't need that as an object of worth. And then over here we have a deck of cards. It's a card game to explore notions of power in advertising. If you guys are familiar with the book, said it, marketing was a big deal. So I took all ads from the 60s, and it's a game where you play, and it's rhetoric based, it's argumentative. You have to seize power and look for it and fight for it. I want people that play to become aggressive, to sort of learn how to not just accept things. And then we have Out of Her, which is this sculptural piece that's furniture. A lot of it is about women being objectified, so I wanted to actually objectify the feminine mystique itself.
Okay. So you can see why, this panel has a particularly intriguing take on the feminine mystique in sort of different directions, from very different directions. So I guess, want to ask Robert, your piece, which you did before this call for entries, still has a very retro feel to it, and we're curious to know, was that intentional, and what it was about, what spoke to you about this sort of vintage era?
Yeah, I was really interested in that kind of, in the cinematic, and I felt like that kind of era has been talked a lot about in the cinematic, like in terms of like cinema, like you see it a lot on television. And I was interested a lot in not just that's just like visually, but I was also really interested, just coming out of doing work about kind of my family and familial roles, like interested in a time where gender roles were really defined. So I decided to take that and make this piece, which uses that aesthetic, but at the same time, it still references the present, because there's certain things I wanted, like my gauges or her hair or her stockings, like things that would kind of make you or make the viewer aware that it's not necessarily a direct representation. Like it's not per se like a straight period piece, but rather it has this push and pull where what it's talking about is more metaphoric and more relevant today, just using the language of the past.
That's really neat.
Can I?
Yeah.
Actually, I'm really intrigued with your use of the word caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
I think that means a lot now. I don't know if you watched Amore.
No, not yet.
So that's like a really great piece about caregiving and the idea of like who should be taking care of whom. And you sort of like switched it almost. Like there's the provider and then there's the caregiver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had this idea of it being where you strive for this mutual, where you hope that you can be caregiving and you hope that you get that in return. But I was really interested in what happens when that's just one-sided, where you give and you don't get in return. And what does that look like and how does that function? So, thank you.
It seems that in sort of taking those sort of modern elements and sort of mixing the two time periods in a way, you're sort of questioning this notion of authenticity, which is something Ilyn really, I think, delves into with the blurring of the past and the present, and looking at your, writing in your grandmother's voice, and not necessarily knowing, did she write it, did you write it? So can you talk a little bit more about your interest in blurring fiction and nonfiction, and what you find authentic, and why that speaks to you so much?
Well, I think that maybe the idea of like writing from with my grandmother's voice is actually sort of a fiction in itself, because this, it totally is not her voice and is mine. And so, but I guess like I'm interested in that because you mentioned sort of objectifying this text, and insofar as sort of looking at history and looking at cultural memory, we are constantly sort of objectifying, historical narratives and trauma, if you will. And so I guess my idea was to sort of create things that were believable or looked visually believable, and then eventually I'm interested in the moment when the reader maybe, or the viewer, realizes that something's amiss, and how that can become, I don't know, illuminating in some ways. And also just kind of blurring not just the relationship between fact and fiction, but also or truth and untruth, which is kind of like sort of I guess unstable sort of binaries, but also to think about the relationship between text and image, and what happens when we mess with that a little bit.
Have you shown your work before? Because I was last night, as the galleries were sort of filling up, and there was big, there were a lot of people in there, and the conversations that were happening around the pieces I thought was really interesting. And even Deborah and I today, when we were going through, like, in your piece, did that really happen? Were you expecting that sort of the conversation around there? Because you are blurring this line, and is that sort of do you envision that as being part of the piece, is how visitors can react to it?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm really happy that that's happening, because we were having a conversation about whether or not to include in the wall text that these are in fact fictional letters, because I thought maybe it would be more significant to have the readers find out themselves, but I've gotten the reaction that even though the wall text says that, there are moments in which like it becomes believable or something. But this is like really new work, so I'm really interested in the feedback. So.
Well, because you become invested in it. You're reading these letters, and you're seeing the images of your family, and it's, even in just six cutouts, you want to know more about the story, and so it's very captivating, I think. So
I think that I'm also sort of like, what's the word? Like writing on these beautiful images of like this Kodachrome film that is like the palette of nostalgia in a way, and so the images of that I have of them are these like really iconographical American road trip photos or family photos and leisurely photos, but they're like Chinese, and so I'm interested in that disruption as well.
Yeah, well, I guess I wonder how, coming from that background and bringing these things together, do you feel that the Feminine Mystique spoke to you, or is it something that you still find relevant, or do you think, or the bits of it that you are most familiar with?
Yeah, I think that, thinking about both the family photographs and sort of even the fictional letters and the Feminine Mystique as sort of a historical document is interesting, but also to have a certain amount of criticism injected is appropriate, in the sense that, whether or not the Feminine Mystique applied to all women, including women of color, is something, that I'm interested in sort of asking through this work.
Interesting. So another piece that of Molly's that I thought I received this particularly a lot of attention last night was the prescription pearls. And I think that your discussion of pharmaceuticals and beauty and, you know, all of these sort of tropes really struck people. Can you discuss how you see these things as interrelated?
I mean, I think it's all interrelated in the sense it's dealing with our bodies and societies. I think it's really relevant today. Anxiety is rampant. I saw an ad for testosterone pills. I thought that was pretty interesting. I feel a lot of what I want to point out with this exhibit is that it seems like it's not just women anymore. Everybody's becoming sort of a victim of the culture that we live in. We are in a culture of convenience, and it's easier, especially if you're in the middle upper class, which is mostly what Betty Friedan is addressing, that you don't have time to really sit back and think about and deal with your problems, and nobody else is either, so you purchase something to deal with it. So I really wanted to explore that route.
Oh, okay. Well, it's an interesting segue because Robert, we wanted to talk to you as, you know, the male on the panel, sort of the elephant in the room. Can you discuss, you know, sort of why the Feminine Mystique spoke to you, and, you know, what made? Obviously, you spoke a little bit about that, and then speaking with your mom, but maybe delve into some of those ideas a little bit more.
Yeah. At first, I hadn't read it before the call. I saw prompts, you know, little quotes, and when I first started reading them, it was really, it was just very strained and very unsettling. So I went out and purchased the book and began to read it, and as I said, like, I talked to my mother about it, and when we were reading it, she just spoke about how she lived that life, like how her mom was the wife who went to Cornell and studied home economics and dropped out to marry a doctor, to have kids, to wake up and make the bed, make the lunches. And I was really fascinated with the Feminine Mystique because as I continued to read it and as I continued to talk to my mother, it became kind of the story, like, it became like a family story. Like, I was even talking to her about how like, she made similar decisions in wanting, like, the husband and the kids. And in thinking about my family and really trying to envision it as, you know, what it is, because my parents got divorced and then my mother came out and remarried a woman. So thinking about how the American family was and then how it dissolved and how it kind of reconfigured really made me curious as to roles, like gender roles and things that Friedan talks about in the Feminine Mystique, and how those can be so confining. So, yeah.
What do you think? This is a question for all three of you. How you think sort of feminism or sort of broader gender roles, and what impact that has on your art and also your generation and you know, our society today? It's a pretty broad question, so take what you will from it.
I think that in thinking about gender roles, it's gotten to the point where we have this idea of what the gender roles are, and especially in the arts community in New York, we have ways of subverting them. So it's like you have this idea of like what things used to be, what they should have been or whatever in like a certain period of time. And now it's like using art, I've seen a lot of people reevaluate those to the point of totally disassembling them and creating kind of like, or striving for a gender equality within like an arts context, which I think is really fascinating.
I like the idea of sort of taking feminism and sort of subversiveness against sort of the, you know, the canon, if you will, as a, you know, a point to go off of. So it's so while my work, for example, the piece downstairs isn't necessarily about feminism, it comes from a framework that does try to sort of disrupt, I guess, the primary narratives. And that's actually something that's what I'm thinking about too in the literature of memory studies, is that it's sort of very dominated by a Western epistemological framework. And so while it's not necessarily, a feminist strategy to think about alternative narratives, it is related in that, in that it feels like we need to examine the structures that are in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think we just need to, like, gender roles, the idea that it's a gender and a role, like, those words shouldn't really go together. You should determine your role in life, what you're good at, what speaks to you. There shouldn't be, from the second you're born, from your environments, the messages, the people, the objects, everything you interact with has these subtle messages and cues that are telling you that this is what it should be. And I think everybody, anything, can work towards defeating that. Obviously, it's going to take a while, but I think it's a sort of cultural cloud that we've made a lot of steps away from. I think people are realizing that nothing is strictly one gender. It's a full spectrum, and that nobody is at one end of the spectrum.
I was just going to ask whether or not, as you were organizing this exhibition and this symposium, whether or not you had sort of reactions from, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like recently I've heard things from, young, smart women who will say something like, I'm not a feminist or anything. So in your organizing these events, have you gotten that feeling that's maybe somehow some people these days think that feminism is a dated topic?
Yeah.
Well, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I mean, we definitely, I found myself in many interesting conversations over the past 2 years, like this F word, feminism. And it was surprising. People that you wouldn't expect, that were, that guys, oh yeah, I'm definitely a feminist too. And women that I would have thought would be proud to say they were feminists, sort of hesitant to say so. And it's interesting. I think some of the other panels have talked about that a little bit. But I'd be interested, Gina, to hear you talk about this a little bit at the New School or in academia, how you feel about this.
Well, first of all, the New School is where the first women's history course was taught by Gerda Lerner, who died recently. And so all of us who are interested in these things must give credit to her, because she really fought to make the study of women in the past as from various academic perspectives through the disciplines, and then also urged that we look at women in new ways beyond the disciplines or interdisciplinarily. She also was instrumental in founding the first master's program in women's history at Sarah Lawrence, which still continues. So it's a very, very proud legacy. And when I came to the New School 18 years ago as an adjunct, a part-time instructor offering one course a semester, and I titled it Mind to Life, Thinking About Women Through Time, it was really calling upon all of the feminist recovery and discovery and reclamation of the past. Then it was 30 years, but now it's almost 50 years. I mean, many of us have stayed in the archival and scholarly trenches looking for evidence about women as they lived very long ago, as well as now. So I think that one of the hardest struggles for at least young American people who are so privileged, but also so beset by anxiety and tensions that don't really have names. I mean, there are a lot of names and a lot of pills, but these things are so complicated to figure out. But the hardest thing is, I think, to understand that feminism is an active process. And however you do it, it does not end. I mean, there is no having achieved feminism, at least not in this culture. And I remind my classes, which deal mainly with learned women of the past who committed the terrible sin of wanting to learn what their brothers knew and were beaten and killed and had their children taken away from them as a result because they dared to publish or to communicate. But that we be very generous with each other when we talk about feminism, and that in agrarian Africa at this moment, most girls do not stay in school beyond the age of 9 because they have to stay with their younger brothers and sisters so their mothers can carry water 3 to 5 hours a day. So when girls all over the world can stay in school as long as they want to and can study whatever they want to in as advanced training as really suits their selves, then we can begin to talk about a humanist culture in which feminism is an integral part. So.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you. That was very insightful. We just want to go and have you all speak about what you want the takeaway to be from your art, what you want your audience to leave thinking about, and also what your own takeaway has been from this process. And then we'll open it up to the audience.
So I hope that in my piece and experiencing my piece, that people begin to kind of understand the complexity of a relationship and of caregiving and kind of evaluate more what a good relationship is and really kind of appreciate the people around them. I think that's really important. But also to remember that these things, these are accounts that have happened in the past, and to keep in mind where we've come from. I do see it now as like a family portrait, and I think that's really important as well. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, thank you.
I think I kind of already spoke a little bit about what I'm interested in. I don't know if I'm necessarily interested in sort of a didactic message, but more of just sort of a consideration about structures, if you will, or like this idea that context is something set, whereas text is something more dependent on it. So, yeah, maybe that's it.
I guess overarching mine is pretty didactic in that I want everybody to read this book. Beyond that, I want people to think about that all of this, or in my mind, most of this was born out of the Cold War and this fear that everybody had. It was a point in time when everybody was scared that something might happen, atomic bomb, and today it's drone strikes. There's a lot of parallels that I think that we can take from this past and this book. So I want people to think about how it's relevant today, and explore the ideas that while we're in society and culture, we can design or create things or use objects to empower ourselves, that it's what you take out of the world and how you take yourself out of a box and just are an individual, and find your own power.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. You'd like to open it up to questions from the audience? Oh, wait, hold on one second until you get the microphone. Thanks.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
I think it's on.
Working?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a question for Professor Walker. You mentioned how in the U.S. feminism, we're not at a point where it has been achieved, and then you mentioned the African culture where it's even subpar to what we've achieved in the U.S. So could you speak to societies? Could you please speak to societies in the world that you feel have achieved feminism, who are there, and who the U.S. should look to as kind of the guiding light?
I don't think anybody has. Perhaps some of the Scandinavian countries have more than others, because child care, which is such an issue in many working women's lives, it's the old question, either, I guess, after my generation, very high-powered career women would say to each other, well, oh, we forgot something. We forgot to have children. So, but there's always an issue with women and children, and it seems that in some of the Scandinavian cultures that has at least been recognized and addressed. But when you live in such a huge heterogeneous culture as ours, I mean, feminism has to be fought for every day and in every way, not to sound like a jingle from the 50s, but that misogyny is part of the vitamins we take and the food we eat and the water we drink. And I think we have to be perhaps braver than we are to really face that, because the poet E. Cummings said, progress is a comfortable disease, and we're so comfortable in so many ways. And I think that the kinds of subversions and tensions that our three artists spoke about are good, if not restful, positions to be in as regards women and feminism and the larger culture.
Hi, is this on? Well, I was really interested in response to your question how the artist said that gender isn't such a major battle they seem to need to fight with their art, which is really wonderful. And given that art museums and galleries for all of history have been plagued by issues of not representing women being tokenized in art, and I was just curious if you really feel that that's not something you have to deal with as a male or a female artist, that as a woman your art isn't a woman's art, or you're not asked, what does this art mean as a woman? Is that not an issue or a question that really exists anymore? And I guess I'd be interested from the curators too, whether your gender sort of impacts your work and working with galleries and venues, and yeah.
I've always found it difficult. I mean, I think that art provides a platform in which you can discuss and gender and kind of really dissect it. But I've always had issues where all of the women, I depict women and I use them as collaborators. Like, we work together to create video works. But the fact that it's a man making work about women, even if it is like a collaboration, even if it is about kind of like identifying certain aspects of like what it is to be a woman or trying to understand that in some way or understand gender roles in some way, I still get that from people that I can't make that type of work because I'm a man. So I mean, I've had difficulty with that in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
I think we're okay. I think actually we are out of time. So we'll take a short break and then we'll have another panel at 3:30. But the artists will be here for at least another 10 minutes, hopefully, if you guys want to ask them any questions. But thank you, and check out the exhibition on 66 Fifth Avenue.
Thank you.